Good morning, everybody. My name is William Berg. I'm the president of the Board of Directors of Preservation Sacramento. I'd like to welcome you all to the Preservation Roundtable. This is Preservation Sacramento's quarterly membership meeting and public outreach forum. And before we start, I do want to begin with an acknowledgement that we're an organization that's concerned with history, with historic preservation in the city of Sacramento. But the city of Sacramento is located on land that for thousands of years before the presence of Europeans was the land of the Nisenan. I want to acknowledge and recognize that the Nisenans legacy in this place is still very much with us. Their community is very much with us, and we want to do what we can as an organization to recognize not just the physical evidence of our past, but also the intangible past, the stories that we can't see now, but are still very much there and very much alive in our traditions and the legacy of our communities. And for today's agenda, I'm going to paste it into the chat. We're going to begin with our first speaker, Sacramento City Council member for District 4, Katie Valenzuela, who's here to say hello and welcome us. And I'll hand it over to Councilmember Valenzuela.
Thank you, Bill. And thanks everybody for joining on an early Saturday morning of a 3-day weekend. It just shows how much this is a priority, I think, for Sacramento. And I was reflecting this morning that I remember the first trip I took to Baltimore, and I had this picture in my head of what Baltimore looked like. I thought these brick buildings and the stoops, and I was really excited to go and see that. And I came to Baltimore right after a big redevelopment had happened around their convention center. And I was at the convention center and I was walking around and I saw all these buildings that were cement and were steel, and it kind of actually looked a lot like downtown LA and some of the changes they had made. And I went around and saw a lot of these brick buildings being destroyed and being torn down to make way for new development that was coming through. And I know since then a lot has been done to try to preserve and preserve that history in those buildings. But I remember thinking what a shame it was that I was in Baltimore, but I didn't feel like I was in Baltimore. It didn't look like Baltimore anymore. And when they had lost that character and that charm, and I've always thought back on that when I think about preservation. And I know Preservation Sacramento is long about much more than just preserving existing buildings and character and history. But, you know, I think what a shame it would be if we look back at Sacramento in 5 or 10 years and had lost all of the buildings, all of the character, all of the attributes that let you know you were in Sacramento, not just the old Victorians and the historic buildings that we know of, but all those quirky little spaces that make Sacramento unique and make it interesting to walk through our streets and help you identify what neighborhood you're in and what community you're in just by looking around at the buildings that you see. So I'm really excited to be working with Preservation Sacramento through the general plan update because, you know, obviously we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of folks who need housing, who need affordable housing. We need to figure out how to make space for folks and how to do it in a sustainable way. We don't want to keep sprawling out into our green spaces. We want folks to be able to walk and bike and sit at coffee shops and do all the things that make Sacramento a great city. But we need to balance that with the need to preserve these buildings, to preserve these attributes, you know, little things like someone emailed me about a building and they like, gosh, can they just do some bay windows or some things that look like other buildings? And he had attached a bunch of photos of buildings nearby. That makes a lot of sense to me that we would try to make sure the new growth incorporates itself really seamlessly into how our neighborhoods have looked and the attributes in our communities that we really love. So I think it's a complicated order, it's a hard order, and I think especially when we try to confront the historic legacy of what land use has been and sort of that uncomfortable history of segregation, of racism really in our land use policy. And so how do we think about growth in a way that intentionally confronts that history, that inequity, but still preserves the part of our community that makes it unique and lets you know when you're standing in the middle of Boulevard Park, when you're standing in the middle of different communities, you know you're in that community just by the way it looks and feels. And I think we can do that in Sacramento and really show what it looks like to be balanced and to be strategic. And it's a tall order, but I'm really excited that we came in actually during a general plan update. My chief of staff, Michelle, and I keep saying how lucky we were that we came in the middle of a once every 8-year update, because I think this moment that we're in, what we're starting to see in our community, not just with homelessness and affordability, but all of the change really warrants a step back and a re-examination and a vision of our city that we can all rally behind, and a roadmap for how we're going to get there. So I'm excited that you all are here. 42 attendees on 10 a.m. on a 3-day weekend is really great. And I don't know if we want to do questions, Bill, but I'm happy to hang out and talk to folks anymore. But I'm just excited to be here with you all and hear what you have to say today. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, we do have, we're ahead of schedule, so we do have time for questions. If anyone who's on the attendees would like to ask a question, there's a button on the attendee column to raise your hand. And if you'll raise your hand, I can actually, you could either type a question into the chat, or if you raise your hand, you can listen, or you can ask a question live. I do see a hand from Elizabeth Ochoa. I'm going to go ahead and have you, I'll turn, let's see. Okay, it looks like you aren't able to talk as a attendee, but Elizabeth, if you can type your question into the chat. Okay. Okay. Well, it looks like we have a question about the library overnight accommodations, and I know we've seen photos of you and other folks volunteering at the center at downtown. Would you like to talk about that and what's going on there?
Yeah, definitely. And I see some folks on the call who've been volunteering as well. I think, the storm that we had a few weeks ago really, it wasn't the first storm. They weren't the first time that unhoused folks have died on our streets, but I do think it did come at a critical moment that pushed some really big changes, which I'm really excited to see. A lot of us had been complaining that we had kind of, for lack of a better word, inhumane criteria for when we would open warming centers to folks. And so I think what we did in terms of saying, we're going to open this, we're going to keep it open until we figure out sort of a long-term solution, was the right move, because folks need safe places to go. So I've been going down there now. Last night was actually my first night in a while that I wasn't down at the center. The city staff, frankly, did a Herculean effort to stand it up and to staff it, but they're not experts at working with the unhoused. They're not trained in that area. So part of what we did was bring in a lot of folks who've been doing this work in the community through Sac Soup and other organizations that have been doing camp outreach since the beginning of the pandemic, and sometimes longer, to come in and help us staff it, since they have a lot of experience with the unhoused. And now officially, I can say as of tonight, First Step Communities, who used to run winter sanctuaries all over the county before that program stopped, is taking over operations. And it's been really great to watch them come in and take it over. But I think this is part of how we think about how we use public spaces and how we take care of folks in the interim, because we're all hoping that as we stand up more hotel rooms, as we start working really aggressively with the new federal resources, that we can give folks places that they can be for longer than just a night. So it's been really wonderful to watch. Of the 60, 65 guests we have each night, I think probably at least 40 of them are regular folks who are coming in every night, and we're building relationships with them, and we're talking with them, and they're talking to the county social worker on site. And it's actually turned out to be pretty chill. Every night somebody has to be asked to leave because they're not ready to, follow the rules, which is totally expected. But, for the most part, you're seeing folks relax a little bit and rest, which has been really great. It's the one time in their day when someone isn't telling them to move along, isn't telling them you can't be here. And it's really great. And Rivka Sass is my hero, not just because she's an amazing librarian with an amazing passion for what she does, but what her and the library staff have done at the Galleria is just incredible. And she's been down there with me almost every night, and she loves that the library is doing this. She loves that they're a part of that solution and really is interested in working with us long term. So I have to give a lot of kudos to Rivka. She's incredible, and I think we have a lot of really cool ideas that we've thought of until you're there. When you're at with someone till 1 a.m, sometimes 4 a.m, you get a chance to chat a little bit, and we have some cool ideas that I really want to pursue working with my D4 homelessness task force. But that's just the beginning. It's not enough. We have way more than 60 folks on the street, but I think what the city has learned in terms of process and how to work with the advocates, how to work with service providers and the in-house is hopefully going to permeate and start to build into a bigger program.
Okay. We have another question. Elizabeth Ochoa, I tried to turn on your mic, but I wasn't able to. But if you can type your question into the chat, I'd be happy to read it for everybody else. And next is Linda. I'm about to try to see if I can allow you to speak. Linda, are you there?
Yes, I was just trying out some of the buttons. I didn't realize what I was doing here.
Okay, so did you have a question?
No, I don't.
Okay, I'll go ahead and disable the audio then. Okay, next, Patty Brown. Patty, you can turn your mic on and ask a question.
Sorry, when I logged on, it must have put it on. I'm not asking one, thank you.
Okay. And then Marion Millen.
I put my question in the chat, Bill. I was asking about the word green space because Katie used it and you used it recently. And I'm wondering where there is actual green space in Sacramento left for any development to happen.
That's a great question. I think, with the Delta Shores project approval, we really, that was sort of the last big project, but what we're seeing happen is there's these really large projects that all are being planned just outside of the city boundaries. So there's two examples that I'm aware of. One's like up near the Panhandle in North Natomas, near the freeway, and in others off El Camino near 5. So just across city boundaries where there's a lot of green space. And because of the interaction of what they're going to need from us if that project gets approved by the county, from water to transportation assets, the city's kind of stuck in this position where we kind of have to expand our sphere of influence so that we can try to have some influence over what that project will look like. But otherwise, the county approves it, and then we're just stuck dealing with the impacts of having that large project just outside of our city boundaries. So that's kind of the largest threat, is like, these developers continue to buy big swaths of land just outside of the city that's currently green space, and then planning these massive subdivision projects. And, we're trying to make them as good as we can, while also thinking about how do we figure out how to increase growth within the city limits so that there's less of a pool, because we obviously don't want to be in this situation.
Well, thank you. Also, there was a moratorium that stopped them in that out in Natomas, which is why they set their sights back on the central city years ago. So is the moratoriums challenged now, or, I mean, they had to stop. So
they did, due to the flood infrastructure and the levees, and due to the investments from the federal government, thankfully, in improving our levee system. That moratorium, I believe, was either partially or fully lifted. I can't remember if it was partial or full, but that was more due to the flood risk and not due to a planning consideration. So they are still able to do that, unfortunately.
Thank you. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, it looks like Elizabeth's question was about the Eichler Historic District, and we're going to talk about it a little bit. Carson is going to mention it, but there isn't going to be a presentation specifically on the Eichler District. Councilmember Valenzuela, have you been briefed on the Eichler District yet? Or
I haven't. I actually was hoping to stay on and eavesdrop a little bit on Carson's presentation so that I could learn more.
Okay. And then we have another question. This is from Kathleen Avey. It said, speaking of green space, how do we achieve greater density and green places for urban dwellers to enjoy and which support their health and well-being?
It's a fantastic idea, question. Thank you, Kathleen. I think, we have a lot of investment we need to do in our existing park spaces. And I think the great thing about projects like what we launched yesterday with Slow Streets, really picking low traffic streets to limit through traffic so we could increase spaces for folks to bike and to walk and to do all sorts of things in the street safely, is an exciting, innovative way to figure out how do we start to repurpose these really huge chunk of our community, our streets. And so if we could make those streets more accessible. And one great thing I think about the outdoor dining work that's happened happened due to COVID is like using the parklet model, thinking about how do we create more spaces for folks to sit outside safely and enjoy the weather and the outdoors and each other. And how do we make that maybe potentially more permanent? And so remember back when I was in grad school in community development, forever ago, parklets were like the really exciting thing, because we're like, well, what if we could use these parking spaces and put some greenery there and make them little seating areas for folks to enjoy? And we've seen restaurants do some really cool creative things in the pandemic. So thinking, how do we really get creative as we increase density? We're going to have to get really creative about how do we keep those outdoor spaces and what that looks like. And some of it might be redevelopment of spaces. Some of it's just investing more meaningfully in the parks we have, like Southside and Land Park, to make sure that they stay healthy and really usable for folks. So it's a fine line, but I think the Slow Streets project is one that I'm really excited about, because it is hard. I mean, those of us who live in Midtown, I mean, I'm trying to keep a wide berth around folks. I don't want to get close to folks, even if we're wearing masks. And so a lot of times I end up bumping into the street to give folks space on the sidewalk. And wouldn't it make sense? Not a lot of folks are driving down my street right now. If we made that more accessible to people and made that a policy decision. So it is a hard balance with growth and making sure there's green space. I remember going to LA once, and they had this little teeny pocket park in the middle of these huge high rises. And I asked somebody, is that the only park in this area? And they were like, yeah. But you think about rooftops, you think about all the different things we could do to try to get creative, like what Wall did, which I know preservation was involved in, with having the rooftop seating area and different spaces. We could really try to figure this out, but that is important for health. It's important for community building. And so we have to, it's a delicate balance. I talk about three-dimensional chess a lot when you talk about planning, because it's like we need more units. We also want to protect space and we want to, increase density, but we want to make sure folks can still get outdoors and be healthy. So I think Sacramento can figure it out. And we have a lot of great models here that we could try to build on.
Okay, and there's another question kind of related from Kate Riley. How does the city ensure canopy trees are planted while maximizing density?
Yes, the trees are, and even keeping the old trees we have when growth occurs. I think I've gotten a lot of really frustrated calls from folks when like someone's getting ready to build a house and they just take down all the trees on their parcel. And you're like, those trees were there for decades. And like some of them were fruitberry trees. I mean, I remember one specific parcel that someone alerted me to near Southside Park. And we were just heartbroken that they just tore down all these really great old fruit trees so that they could make room for this building. And I think a lot about this house I toured. I used to love going on home tours pre-COVID, obviously, just to, spy a little bit, but just to get inspired by what folks were doing with their houses. And I remember this house in East Sac where they had this really beautiful old tree. I forget what kind of tree it was, but they'd almost like curved the house around this tree, and they had like the patio kind of curved around, and it was gorgeous. And I thought, gosh, I know this is more expensive, but how do we protect the trees we have and also ensure that we're planting trees? Because for urban heat island, for health, for well-being, we know that's really critical. And I know that we have our tree ordinance, but I also know there's a lot of room for improvement on the tree ordinance. And so those are the sort of things that I think either in the general plan or moving forward, getting advice from those of you who've been doing tree advocacy. And I see a lot of folks on this call that I know have been doing that work. How can we make that a little bit more enforceable? How can we make it a little bit more meaningful? If someone cuts down an old tree and plants a new one, that's not the same thing, as a tree that had, was 3 feet in diameter and was providing a ton of shade and related climate and environmental benefits. So I would love input on that, because I think, our tree canopy is one of our greatest assets, and it kills me to see trees getting cut down and like my park near me, somebody cut down a couple trees and they were diseased and they needed to get cut down, but it just changed the whole dynamic of the park when those trees went away. And so yeah, I think we have a lot more work we could do there to learn from what's been done so far under the tree ordinance and how we could make even investment and maintenance of our trees more of a priority.
Okay, I know there's at least one project. There's one I think around 22nd and I Street where there's this amazing old black walnut, and the original version of the plan called for the tree to be removed, actually for a parking lane. And there was discussion between the neighbors and the developer. And the developer is one who's pretty sensitive to neighborhood concerns, in part because he lives the few blocks from the development. And it sounds like it was redesigned so they're keeping the tree. So that's a win. And it can be a fine line to walk, because very often people who have concerns about a project or something that's being done, that, oh, they just want to stop the project from happening, and this tree or whatever is just an excuse. But these are things that people care deeply about. So thank you for that concern and expression of policy. There's 23rd night, I guess, and then
Yeah.
there was a
I
question.
was trying to picture where you were saying, I'm just like, I don't think there is, but
No.
there is a lot over on 23rd. That's awesome that
Yeah.
was worked out.
And yeah, Ron Velakis is the developer for that. And there's also a question, this is maybe more back to the shelter issue, is that there's another freeze expected on the 16th, if you're apprised of that. Is there any additional steps being taken, or is it?
Yeah, we're actually trying to open up additional shelters. So there's a few, so we're doing like a few things concurrently. Like the big priority and big push has been getting hotel rooms online, because with the new Biden administration, one of the things they did was allow 100% reimbursement for non-congregate, which means the shelters, the warming centers don't qualify, but the hotel rooms do. So we're trying to bring as many hotel rooms online as we can, because folks could potentially, if it works out, they kind of start them on 7 days to see how it goes, and then they can extend it potentially through the end of September, which would be game changing. And when it comes to case management and helping us invest more in the resources to move folks to the next step in the process after shelters. So that's been a huge priority. And there's hundreds of rooms that are getting ready to come online in the next couple of weeks, which isn't soon enough for the freeze, but we're really trying to move folks. And especially like folks who are pregnant or folks who have children, we're moving them in right now, because there are a few rooms that we've kind of set aside to make sure that extremely vulnerable folks get shelter ASAP. I literally had a family walk into the Galleria, family of 5, and the mom was 9 months pregnant, like literally due like that weekend. And we had them back in their car and going to a hotel room 30 minutes later, because like we have to make sure that we're prioritizing folks, but moving folks in as quickly as possible. But when it comes to the shelters, I think our hope is to keep the Galleria open for a while, which is hard. It's an old building. This is a really intense use for it. So we're really trying to work with library staff and think through how do we make sure that we can keep it open, because it's the perfect spot. Folks are already there at the park and can just come in at night. We're also working with Sac City Unified to open a school, sort of like a pilot school. I don't know if I get to say where it is yet, but it should be announced soon if it hasn't been announced already. And we're going to try it out. And if that works well, we're hoping we can expand to other school gyms and auditoriums, because those schools are likely not going to be open for several months and can provide another spot. And then there's like the winter sanctuary type model of the safe parking and the safe camping, and working with our faith community. And several folks have reached out who are very interested in exploring what that looks like with the city. So I'm hopeful we can keep the gallery open and maybe open a few more spots. Really, I know the 16th is like 2-3 days away, but I think we'll have at least that second big spot open by the 16th and through the duration of the spring and into the summer. But yeah, we need to move more quickly. It's not going to be enough. And so part of what the other thing we're asking staff to do is to work with the advocates to do more camp outreach as well. Make sure folks have the equipment that they need to be safe, the sleeping bags, the tents, the tarps, so that they can kind of hunker down where they're at, which is not at all the ideal scenario for a whole range of reasons, but at least ensures that folks have some of the tools they might need to keep safe. So that's not good enough. We're working as quickly as we can. I just feel like, I mean, I'm used to being an advocate where it's like, let's go right now. And now watching, but I am impressed watching the city pivot in these last couple of weeks. I really feel like we're finally moving in the right direction, and hopefully more will start coming online soon.
All right. Thank you. It looks like we have one more comment from Elizabeth Ochoa about tree removal for trees encroaching over one's property can be hazardous, with large, thick limbs dropping on the property and occupants, and any change in tree protections should take that into account.
Yes.
So, all right.
Definitely.
And I think that's
And
all.
I saw a comment too about City Hall parking garage. It is currently being used for safe parking. Thanks for reminding me, because I forgot to mention that. Also, Southside Community Center is being used. And we do have a second parking lot that we've identified if City Hall starts to get full that we can direct cars to. And so any help folks can have in helping spread the word. It is hard because folks like, maybe their registration isn't up to date, especially if you have an RV. RVs don't fit obviously into the parking garages, but for folks who are interested, those garages are available. They have bathrooms, and we're working on trying to figure out how to keep that going and maybe provide some more food and other services there as well.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your welcome and for your time. And I'll go ahead and we'll switch over to have Carson turn on his video and join us. So, I'd like to welcome as our next speaker, Carson Anderson. He's the City of Sacramento's Preservation Director, and he's going to update us on what's going on with historic preservation in the city.
Okay. Thank you, Bill, for the introduction. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I want to give a shout out to Councilmember Valenzuela. Appreciate her participation in this conversation we're having today. I should say to the council member and to the rest of you, I've always viewed my job with the city as, I guess this is sort of kind of a joking way of putting it, as ensuring that the old buildings play well together with new development. I really do see that as the role of the preservation director and the urban design manager in our planning efforts here in Sacramento to balance the needs of historic preservation thoughtfully with the need for new housing, incorporation, and new development to keep the city vitalized and growing. I think that's probably one of the things that is behind the preservation policies in the planning code is the idea of encouraging the adaptive reuse of older buildings and ensuring that they have new uses so that there's less of a need to demolish them. To go to the example, Councilmember Valenzuela, you mentioned in your travels to Baltimore, where you saw wholesale demolition of older buildings. So we're endeavoring to communicate the idea that historic preservation is an environmentally sustainable practice. Part of the reason for that is the idea of embodied energy, all of the inputs into the building of historic buildings over time, the transportation inputs, the materials that were manufactured or cultivated and brought to build the building are lost when we demolish older buildings and throw the demolition debris into a landfill. I'm also inspired by what some other cities, including the city of Detroit, have done to bring together housing, development, promotion, environmental sustainability, and affordability. The Detroit Land Bank Authority has, I think for about the last 10 years or so, had a program where they have acquired the many thousands of abandoned homes and buildings in Detroit, retrofitted them so that they're energy efficient. They've used the Secretary of the Interior standards for repairing the buildings in ways that are sympathetic to their design character. They've created first home buyer loan programs, written down the cost of the land to make the homes affordable to working class and lower income families. These are all models we should consider and embrace here in Sacramento, and I'd love to be part of a conversation for helping that happen. So with those remarks, I'm going to kind of launch into some of the prepared comments that I had. I will start with some of the larger projects that planning staff is involved in right now, and then I will talk about some of the landmark nomination efforts that are underway. Then I will switch over to some of the longer term planning efforts that staff's involved in. And then finally, I have a few announcements at the end that I'm going to share with you. I think the first project that I would like to talk about is the rail yards. We've been working with the developer of the rail yards, DRV, and a really exciting concept they have there, and some serious discussions with Live Nation that involve turning the now abandoned paint shop building into a Live Nation venue. Planning staff has been looking at some of the ideas for adaptively reusing the paint shop building for that purpose. The treatments have been thoughtful and consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards thus far, and how they're treating the exterior envelope of the building to accommodate the new use. We've been talking with them about some programming of the space that's to the west of the building, which is in the subdivision plan is actually a street. And they're looking at that as a pedestrian plaza space, and that they will program to try to drive energy, get people kind of walking around and being outside the building and using that space to support the Live Nation use inside the building, and also to create an exciting gateway to the passageway that connects with Sacramento Station to the south. So this is probably one of the most exciting things that the preservation planning staff is talking with the development community about currently. Another thing that I wanted to highlight are the efforts of our long-range planning staff, specifically the Neighborhood Development Action Team effort that's being led by Elizabeth Boyd. And these efforts are focused on some of our neglected boulevard corridors in the city, including Franklin Boulevard, Stockton Boulevard, and Del Paso Boulevard up in North Sacramento. Currently, the focus is on Stockton Boulevard, and there is also kind of a, I won't call it secondary, but an aligned effort to focus on revitalization of Del Paso Boulevard. One of the key kickoff activities that occurred back in January was a really interesting conversation about placemaking opportunities along Stockton Boulevard. I was part of the panel discussion on that. And so we were talking about ways to build down, to break down some of the sense of, well, people having a sense of fear, not connecting with the community, people from the outside driving along Stockton and not being able to engage with the cultural histories, with the built environment there. And so public art and cultural event activities and other placemaking ideas were shared about how to create a sense of connection amongst the residents, ways to bring in the outside community in a way to encourage kind of the building of community and also beautification and reinvestment along Stockton Boulevard were all kind of touched upon in that dialogue last month. Also wanted to mention the Fruit building that's at the corner of 4th and J Street. This is one of the first high-rise structures in Sacramento, built back in the early to mid 19-teens. One of the first buildings, I believe, that was built of reinforced concrete. It was built as a office building originally. It is now part of a quickly finalizing adaptive reuse effort to be converted into a hotel. The developer, I thought, was very thoughtful in trying to balance the need for changes on the interior to accommodate the hotel use, but also respecting the historic character of the building on the outside of the building. Not only were most of the key architectural elements on the exterior preserved, but there were also some elements that were missing that were reincorporated into the design, such as the bulkhead or kick plate features that are at the base of the building along the sidewalk, which were apparently a very nice sort of green verdigris marble material originally, and then over the years many of those were removed, and so those were reincorporated into the design. I don't have a completion date for the building, but I believe we're getting very close to it opening, so I would imagine this summer we will see the building opened, and I think it will be a delightful addition to the downtown area in Sacramento. The next thing I wanted to touch upon are some of the landmark nominations that are underway. So we have two that have particularly compelling African-American historical associations going forward. We have the Nathaniel Colley residence in Southland Park Hills, and also James Dodd, who was probably the key African-American architect working in Sacramento at the mid-20th century. James Dodd actually designed Nathaniel Colley's law offices on S Street in the mid-1960s. And so it's kind of interesting that these two nominations are moving forward. They will go to the Preservation Commission this Wednesday for the commission's consideration. Prior to that, we also sent forth a nomination of the Nisei Veterans of Foreign War Hall on 4th Street. This was a building that was sent to the keeper of the National Register by the State Historical Resources Commission recently. And so we basically copied their homework, if you will, and used the National Register nomination to put together a nomination for the Sacramento Register. And that went to the Preservation Commission late last year and will be going forward to City Council, I believe in March. Staff is also working with the residents in the Southland Park Hills Eichler tract. This was a subdivision that was created by Joseph Eichler back in the mid-1950s. He brought in the accomplished architectural design team from Los Angeles, Jones and Emmons architects, to design the homes. They are elegant ranch-style houses based on various floor plan designs. So we have a nice continuity, if you will, in the overall sense and how the subdivision was laid out and how the buildings relate to one another, but a delightful differentiation, if you will, between the individual houses as they line up next to one another. So staff has been working with the residents of the Eichler tract over the past year, going back to February of last year, in shaping a historic district nomination. The residents expressed an interest in our developing the draft design guidelines for how the properties in the district would be treated. They figured this would be the most successful way of getting near unanimous support for a historic district nomination going forward. So we've been working with kind of a working group of the residents over the last several months who've contributed their ideas, gone out and photographed the buildings in their subdivision for us at the City Hall. And then I have been working with them to craft objective design standards for the historic district that we can bring forward to the community this spring, and then hopefully move forward if we get support for the district idea, bring forward a historic district nomination this summer. Another historic district effort that is underway is in Curtis Park. This is Montgomery Way. Happy to see that Don Cox and Paula Bogosian are part of the meeting today. They're going to give you more details about how that effort is going. Montgomery Way is kind of one of the showcase streets in Curtis Park with a huge number of homes that were designed by some of the best architects working in Sacramento during the mid 20th century, including architects Dean and Dean and others. And I'm sure the audience, today's meeting will be looking forward with some anticipation to what they will be sharing about the district. So we look forward to receiving and working with Paula and Don and the residents on advancing that nomination. I imagine that's going to be happening this summer, this year. Then I should also mention Francisco Boulevard kind of relates to our neighborhood development action team's efforts along Stockton Boulevard. Francisco Boulevard is just off of Stockton to the east, and it was a subdivision created in the 19-teens with wide boulevard and parkway elements with palm trees planted along it in several rows to create kind of a distinctive design identity. And we are going to bring forward a district nomination for the public right-of-way elements. So this won't involve any of the houses, but it'll embrace the street and the parkway and the trees. And we'll be working with our urban forestry folks on the landscape components of that proposal. Also want to mention the new Helvetia Historic District as part of the West Broadway specific plan effort last year. New Helvetia National Register Historic District was the focus of the City Council, improving the specific plan, and seeing that it is listed on the National Register. The direction from council was that we go ahead and add the district to the Sacramento Register. So we began that effort actually last year. Sadly, our intern had that as one of her key assignments. She took a full-time job late last year, only part of the way through of pulling together the information that we needed to kind of push this forward as for listing on the Sacramento Register. But we anticipate being able to pick up this effort again. We're just conducted interviews for 2 preservation intern positions last week and made job offers this week. And so we think we'll have the proper staff support to move forward Sacramento Register listing of new Helvetia Historic District this summer. Also wanted to highlight a few buildings that were documented as part of the 2017 Mid-Century Modern Historic Context statement and survey that we did to document buildings from the mid-20th century that were historically and culturally significant. One of the themes that was touched upon in the historic context, but we didn't have budget or time to flesh out, were some of the financial institutional buildings that were built in the 1950s and 60s and early 70s across the Sacramento region. Many of them designed by our most accomplished architects and really excellent examples of mid-century modern design. We have noted that two particular buildings appear to be vacant, abandoned, and in some danger of being demolished. One of them is what was originally the Sumitomo Bank at 1331 Broadway. This was a bank established by the Japanese American community, I think back in the 1950s period. And so the association with the Japanese American community and also the very interesting architectural design treatment are worthy of landmark listing, and we'll be looking at how to pursue that in the near term to address a potential loss of the property. Another one is the bank building at 2031 J Street. This is on the west side of J and 21st Street. This was built as a bank building back in around 1960. It was designed by the accomplished architectural firm of Starks, Josens, and Knacht, who designed the Sacramento Courthouse building and a number of other noteworthy buildings in the mid-century modern design style. Both of these buildings, both the Starks, Josens, and Knacht building and the Sumitomo Bank building will be focus of our landmarking efforts. Next thing I wanted to talk about are some of the longer range planning things that the preservation staff's involved in. So the key thing I think to highlight is the need, because of the passage of SB 35, for the development of objective design standards for our historic districts. Bruce Monaghan, our urban design manager, has kind of spearheaded this effort. We had various stakeholder meetings over the past month or so, including with the local chapter of the AIA, to get feedback on these draft design guidelines. There was a discussion with the Capitol Mansions Neighborhood Association earlier this week to get to make them aware that the draft objective design standards were under preparation, invite their input. We have a preliminary cutoff date for receiving public comment on those draft design guidelines of March the 5th. I believe we have already linked the document to the preservation webpage so that you can have a look at it and provide your comments. This item will go to the Preservation Commission at its March meeting. So that will be a public hearing and an opportunity to hear further discussion and to share comment on what's been developed thus far. I'll also mention the general plan update effort. The draft land use map had been circulated to preservation community. There was actually a very helpful meeting back on December the 15th with preservation stakeholders to gather input for how to refine the draft land use map that's part of the general plan. City Council basically accepted that draft land use map on the 19th of January. And so staff is the direction of moving forward with developing draft document, draft general plan document, I should clarify. One of the things where I think your attention as a preservation community needs to go to is one of the key strategy is preserving livability and a sense of place. That's where we really, that's where the the tire of the car meets the road. How to, as I was saying kind of when I began my remarks earlier, how we blend the idea of new development and historic preservation in a way that that is seamless, where we're preserving the historic resource and we're doing it in such a way that we can incorporate new infill development, additions that are appropriately designed to accommodate the obvious tens of thousands of housing units that need to be built to accommodate our population growth, but also commercial development and other forms of development. How do we do that and preserve the historic resources and the community's sense of place? So I invite all of your input on how to go about doing that. We have some fabulous examples in the community. Bill Berg mentioned Ron Verlakis. There's a wonderful project at the corner of 11th and R Street, which blends the preservation of the historic building with an infill development and new housing in a way that is seamless and thoughtful and appropriate. And so we need all of your ideas about how to go about doing doing this. That is really kind of one of the components in making this key strategy of the general plan work out properly. Finally, some things before I go into announcements. So we were successful in getting a grant from through the Office of Historic Preservation for the promotion of the city's preservation program and for public education efforts. The components of that grant that were called out in our scope of work include developing an engaging postcard that we're going to get a consultant, a communications consultant to work with us on designing, that will go out to all of the property owners of historic properties to let them know that they are the owners of a historic property and that there's both an obligation as stewards and also benefits that come with being a property owner of an historic building. And so we're going to try in an engaging way to capture their attention. There might be a little bit of a gimmick involved where they can kind of, if they check out a link on the postcard, they might be able to enter into a raffle or something to get them to read the postcard and respond and engage with it. Educational modules of various kinds would be developed and linked either with smartphone apps or to the city's webpage that will address curriculum in schools, real estate brokers, how to do it type things for owners of historic properties, and maybe history components about the architectural and cultural history of the community that we can work with Sacramento Heritage and Preservation Sacramento in promulgating. Also a public service announcement, so developing a pilot that we could launch at a future date to go on the public radio and public TV that would air, that would talk about preservation in the city. So those are some of the components that are talked about in the grant. We also did another grant pursuit. This one is sponsored by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. It's called the African American Cultural Heritage Fund. So we don't know if we're going to be successful in that. We're waiting to hear back. This would be a grant to do an African American heritage context statement for the city. So to build upon some of the landmark nominations that we did and some of the research that has been done over the year to create a framework for looking at resources in the city that are associated with African Americans and how to register them for landmark consideration and for other purposes. These tie in with efforts that are going on nationwide, including the city of Los Angeles's African American Heritage Initiative. I was actually invited to participate in a panel discussion back in early December with my accomplished colleagues from all over the country to talk about why it is that there's so few resources associated with African Americans that are listed, officially recognized as landmarks, and what we can do about that, and how we can kind of change the concept of preservation to include maybe a little bit more than putting things on a register. So this goes to the idea of placemaking that I touched upon earlier in connection with Stockton Boulevard and other approaches to kind of promulgate preservation. So wanted to share that bit of detail with you. And then I should also mention, connected with that point, that the Preservation Commission at its March meeting will get kind of a report out of the panel discussion that the City of Los Angeles sponsored back in decision with a lot more detail. And then members of the public, you all can kind of access that information from the meeting agenda for the March meeting. And also another announcement, Bruce Marwick of the Art Deco Society. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with Bruce and his work on the cultural history of Sacramento, is going to be giving a talk sponsored by the Art Deco Society the designer and artist Dunbar Beck. This will be on February the 18th. I'm sure it will be very informative. Beck was actually involved in the design of the Sacramento B building, corner of O and 21st Street, and a related building that's across the street of it that has kind of gone under the radar, but was actually designed as kind of a test kitchen facility for the women in Sacramento, where they could roll out, the Sacramento Bee could roll out discussions about homekeeping and cooking recipes and all this, those sorts of things. And Dunbar Beck was the designer of that building across the street. I was not aware until Bruce Marwick mentioned this, that Beck was more than an artist and actually had a hand in designing some of the buildings in the city. So it should be a fascinating talk, and I commend that to you. And then last but not least, an announcement has gone out, I think roughly 7 or 8 days ago, for the senior preservation planner position. That is the position that I hold. And so I wanted to share with you that I am planning to retire. The event being that I will turn 70 years old this summer. And so it seemed like an appropriate time for me to tender my resignation. I want to assure you that the program will be in good hands. Sean DeCourcy, the Associate Preservation Planner, will provide continuity. As I shared with you earlier, we also gave 2 job offers this week for 2 preservation internship positions. So they will help Sean and Bruce Monaghan in supporting the preservation program until we can find a replacement for myself, which I think will be within the next several months' time. I want to, I didn't want this to be I didn't want this to be more of a surprise than it may already be, and I didn't want rumors to be out there about what was going on. So yes, my retirement, and I will be around for the next several months working with Sean and the interns to advance the idea of continuity for the preservation program. So with all of that, I will conclude my remarks. I don't know if we have time. If there are any questions, Bill, I'll endeavor to answer them.
Okay. I didn't see any hands go up or any questions in the Q&A box. So it looks like there's one from John Marshak. So I'll go ahead and put him on the air. John, you should be able to speak now.
Thank you. I really appreciate your work over these years, Carson, and I applaud you on your retirement. I hope you enjoy it very much. I did have a couple of questions. First of all, on the land use map for the general plan update, you mentioned that the city council accepted the map. My understanding is that the city council accepted the concept of the map, but that some of the details were still to be worked out. Is that still true?
Sean, that is actually accurate. So yes, the concept was accepted. Staff is still working and refining, still open to input. As you know, we did have a preservation stakeholders meeting back in December. I think I'm pretty sure you were part of that. And so in response to the comments provided then, staff did a lot of rethinking about the mapping and is quite open, frankly, to further discussion of some of the details.
Terrific. The other question I had to do with the development of objective design standards for historic districts. Is the effort really to distill out of the historic district plans which particular things are already objective standards and to put those into a document? Or are you actually thinking of adding additional ones, brand new objective design standards that would be applicable to historic districts?
Sean, that's a brilliant question, very insightful. Yes, the idea is to basically pull out the objective standards that are in the historic district plans. Where necessary, maybe new objective standards added in. but we are really using all of that work that went into creating the historic district plan and the context to populate the objective design criteria. So that's the go-to source for the most part for this.
But you would be open to adding a few new ones if they are appropriate.
Absolutely, yes, to meet the
Terrific.
needs, yes.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, John. Got a question. Well, maybe it's a question more to think about than to answer at this point. Is what is your proudest career accomplishment? But obviously, the career's not quite over yet. So maybe it's something to save for the next roundtable, or we'll have some sort of celebration to see you off for your retirement.
I would say just, this is kind of off the top of my head, but the effort to get the mid-century modern historic context and the survey launched was certainly a high point and very exciting, since so much of Sacramento was developed after the Second World War. And we have, as you know, for the National Register, a 50-year kind of yardstick for beginning looking seriously at things and evaluating whether they are historic or not. So that means things up to 1970 fall within that lens. And so having the historic context for mid-century resources done to give us kind of measuring sticks for looking at the built environment and cultural resources was very helpful. And then also the more exciting efforts of late of documenting more of our ethnic historical resources. So Nisei veterans of foreign war, having that move forward, our African-American related resources connected with Nathaniel Colley and others, very exciting to me. We look forward to doing more of that. I think that is really called for here in a city so diverse as Sacramento. So there's obviously a great pool of resources to look at going forward.
Okay, well, thank you, Carson, for updating us and for the presentation. And the Preservation Commission is this Wednesday at 5 o'clock, right?
5:30.
5:30. Thank you. And we'll when we send out an email with about the video, once this is posted tomorrow, we'll also include a link to Preservation Commission. So it's on the city's website, and then we're going to try to spread the word, because you mentioned the Colley residents and the Dodd residents are both on the agenda.
Exactly right.
Okay.
And the pairing is just really quite wonderful. The fact that Dodd designed Colley's law offices, and so the two gentlemen knew each other and worked with each other.
Okay, well, thanks for your time. And we're going to switch over. We'll have Carson turn off his camera, and we'll switch over to Laurie Stetson. Luree, if you could turn your camera on, and we'll have an update from Luree. Laurie Stetson has been a member of Preservation Sacramento for quite a while, and she has been involved with a lot of local preservation efforts. She was one of the forces behind the National Register nomination for New Helvetia. And because of her extensive experience with the state of California, working in the Capitol, she's become an absolutely fabulous agent of change for policies regarding some of the historic properties in and around Capitol Park. So Luree, if you're there, could you turn your camera on?
It won't let me turn my
Hold
camera
on.
on
Let me,
because the host has stopped it.
let me see if I can change that.
Oh, okay, start my video.
All right. Well, and then as I mentioned, Luree has been working on both the Capitol Fountain and the Capitol Annex, principally the Capitol Fountain project, which we did a lot with in 2019 and early 2020, and then it kind of went away, and now it has come back. So I've asked Luree to give us an update on what's happening.
So I'm going to give an update on the State Capitol Fountain and also the State Capitol Annex project. But as Bill said, I volunteered to represent Preservation Sacramento on the state capitol fountain because I was outraged that the Department of General Services suggested 2 years ago, actually, that they were going to demolish the fountain with no specific information in the project's EIR as to why. There were some minor details about the fountain needed some electrical work, plumbing work, and things like that, but nothing that justified demolition. So Preservation Sacramento has been lead in getting other organizations, statewide preservation organizations, to oppose the demolition, including the California Preservation Foundation, the Save Our Heritage organization in San Diego, and one other one that I can't remember offhand. Oh, the California Capitol Historic Preservation Society. And from that, we actually got language. What happens is the Department of General Services had to ask for funding to actually restore the unroofed building. And as part of that funding, they were asking for $600,000 to demolish the fountain. We successfully got that changed in the Senate Budget Subcommittee hearing. And then the department's request was going to be heard in the Assembly Budget Subcommittee hearing, but that was put on hold because of COVID. And the governor wanted General Services to do a study on office space needs for Unruh building, the Bonderson building, and the existing Resources Agency building. So needless to say, the BCP didn't go forward last fiscal year. It's back this year. And this year, DGS, when I spoke to them in January, said they had the same position. They're not opposed to renovating the fountain if the legislature gives them direction. We had met with the director of DGS and their deputy director of real estate about 1.5 years ago, and successfully argued how the fountain could be restored and not be seen as a detriment during a drought, use of water, wasteful use of water, and things like that. So they agreed to get direction from the legislature. They still have that same position this year. The only difference is that the budget change proposal does not mention the fountain at all. So we have to argue to include the fountain by amending part of the budget change proposal. That was heard this past week in the Assembly Budget Subcommittee meeting. It was an informational hearing where they cannot take action. They didn't have enough members to take action. But thanks to all of you that sent in individual comments from the Preservation Sacramento Alert, they're aware that we want the fountain restored. And our argument this year is somewhat different and I think a little stronger. When you combine how much the state is spending on renovating that historic district, it's called the Capital Extension Group. It's the Unruh building and the Library and Courts building. They will have spent, if they approve this year's request to restore the Unruh building, $200 million for both those buildings. And yet they won't restore the Capitol fountain that links those two buildings and is the centerpiece for that historic district. So I think we have a strong argument. The budget change proposal is going to be heard in the Senate Budget Committee on February 24th. We'll be sending out an alert to all of you to send your comments to the Budget Subcommittee. The Senate is more favorable than the Assembly. We think it might end up in a full budget hearing on the state budget, which is a little more difficult. But at this point in time, we don't know when that'll occur. So thanks to all of you for your help on that. We will get back to you on the committee members in the Senate that you should be sending your comments to. And then, and I should point out that DGS in response to our letter, said that they're not going to demolish the fountain at this point in time, and they don't plan on doing anything with it. So in fact, they testified they're going to do demolition by neglect and let it sit there. So anyway, that's going to be moving on in a couple of weeks. The Capital Annex project, you got a thorough presentation from Karen Schock at the last roundtable. So I'm just going to summarize it. Karen is part of the public accountability for our capital group, as I am, as Marion Millen is, and a few others. But just to refresh your memory, the Capital Annex project is comprised of three elements. The annex on the east side that the Joint Rules Committee is proposing to completely demolish, the parking garage south of the restored state capitol along N Street for 200 spaces underground, and a new visitor center on the west side coming up to the west steps of the restored historic building, looking out on Capitol Mall. And the PAC has identified serious problems with the process, starting at back in 2019, when the public really wasn't aware that this project was moving forward. What their proposal does is impact over 100 tree removals with the underground parking garage and also the wide Disneyland entrance to the west steps of the state capitol, of the restored state capitol. Also, the fact that they are proposing to demolish the East Annex with no justification as to why it can't be restored. And we've done numerous legislative Open Records Act requests for information and the basis and rationale for that decision, and have been told that that's privileged information. So the Joint Rules Committee hasn't been forthcoming as to how they decided that demolition was in the best interest. In addition, since the draft DIR went out in February of last year, Joint Rules consultants came in September 9th, and I think Karen mentioned this, with completely new ideas on the project. One was moving the underground parking garage for 200 spaces along N Street to 12th Street, the north-south walkway that's called 12th Street on the east side of the East Annex. And then they also proposed 3 different options for a new annex. One was a circular one was a double T option, and one was a square option. And all of these how do I want to say this? Overshadow the historic restored state capitol building. And part of the goal of this project was not to overpower the existing original state capitol that's been restored. They didn't have any cost figures for this, and they'd given those options to the Joint Rules Committee members the night before, wanting a decision. Unfortunately, they didn't have a quorum, so they couldn't take action on this back in September of 2020. We don't know where they are on the project. They haven't had any more public meetings on this. But since then, PAC has been getting more support and broadening our opposition to the Joint Rules Committee project and supporting our alternative. The PAC alternative is to reduce the fiscal costs by eliminating the parking lot from the project and using the parking that's going into a new building that the legislature is going to be moving into next fall as the annex is either demolished or restored. So the legislature will be working out of the 10th and O building called the Swing Building for 4 years. It's a 10-story building along our street, just down from the old Posies or LeBou's, if you know that area. And we also said, instead of using that building for only 4 years temporarily, use it permanently. Keep some of your staff there, use the parking garage there, and then you can commute to the state historic capital and the annex. That optimizes the space, and it was actually part of the option in the Swing Buildings EIR that the legislature could continue to use that.
Luree, I'm sorry, we kind of need to move on to the next.
Okay,
agenda
so
item.
then finally, we're asking them to renovate rather than demolish the annex and to ensure that there's a new design for the visitor center and it's scaled back and it doesn't take away from the state historic capital west side and saves more trees, as many trees as possible. So we'll need to get some alerts out to you folks. We need to encourage you to go to savecalcap.org and saveourcapital.org and take action and send those links to your friends statewide so they can send in comments to a lot of state legislators as we continue to lobby them in the Capitol. So thank you. I'll take any questions.
Okay. I don't see any questions about this. I don't see any hands raised, so we'll go ahead and move on. Thank you, Luree.
Okay, you're welcome.
I'll have you
Yeah.
stop your video.
Yeah.
And before we continue, before we move on to Don's presentation, I just wanted to briefly summarize some of what we did last year. Obviously, because of the current situation, there are a lot of things that we didn't do. We didn't do any membership-based tours. We didn't do our annual home tour. That was the biggest thing and probably the biggest hit because that's our main fundraiser. We were unable to open the doors for any historic places for our members to tour, which is something we really like to do as a member benefit, as well as helping connect people with projects that are ongoing. But we did do a lot. We sent out correspondence on many projects, including comments on environmental reports and letters of support for historic properties, both listed in the Sacramento Register and the National Register. And then we were able to, this year, so I'm going back and checking, I don't think we actually opposed anything this year. So either we're getting easier or the projects are getting better. But so that's part of what we're going to be sending out to our members in hard copy form, a copy of the annual report. If you're a member and we have your mailing address, we'll send that, and a couple of bumper stickers too. We got some bumper stickers last year. We're going to send two. One is car sized, one is bicycle sized. So you'll have some options for placement. But we wanted to say thank you by sending those and providing just a little piece of paper to fill you in on our activities. Some of the things we commented on were things like Aggie Square, which has historic resources, the old both Governor's Hall and the Machinery Building. And we wrote an editorial, for those of you regular readers of the News and Review, about the removal of statues in Sacramento and how that reflects with national trends. We also did lobbying, as Luree filled you in, and we did two special projects last year that are now coming to fruition. We provided funding, originally paid for with funds we got from Capital City Preservation Trust, for National Register nominations for the Jefferson School on N Street and the North Sacramento School on Dixie Ann in North Sacramento. And Both of those were heard by the State Historical Resources Commission last month, and they've been sent for review by the keeper of the National Register. We should hear back from those later this spring. And those were our main expenditures as well as our main projects during the course of the year. We also provided comments on the 2040 general plan and some concerns about what it meant for historic properties and historic districts. And we did a workshop about that in January. Also, to update people, we got a question from, actually it's a comment from Bruce Marwick, who the Dunbar Beck presentation was mentioned, and Bruce wanted to say thanks to Carson for announcing the Dunbar Beck presentation on February 18th at 7 p.m. And he wanted to mention that the Renaissance Society is the co-sponsor of the event and that it is free. And somebody in the chat mentioned my Art Hotel T-shirt. I wanted to wear this because February is this year is the 5th anniversary since Art Hotel and the 4th year since its follow-up Art Street. And both of those were events that, while they both took place in buildings that were scheduled for demolition, or in the case of the Marshall Hotel, where we had an exhibit, a very extensive facadist rebuilding, essentially. They were useful and functional events in addition to their promotion of the arts, their promotion of Sacramento, but talking about the potential uses of historic buildings and the loss of not just of historic fabric for its architecture, but for its function as housing. The Art Hotel event took place in an apartment building that was lost, and these were older, smaller buildings that meant a loss of housing in Sacramento that, when you replace that sort of housing, it costs a lot more than it does to rehab. And so I wanted to wear this because I liked that experience and wanted to promote. And maybe the next time that we do something like this, it'll be in a building that's being rehabbed rather than one that's about to be demolished. And finally, I wanted to mention 2 projects that are coming up in 2021 that we're going to be working on. Both the other major project we did that we funded in 2020 was we provided some funding to the folks who were doing the survey of Montgomery Way. We provided some funds, and they provided a 2/3 match just from contributions from the neighbors to pay for the survey that you're about to hear about from Don, and that's going to be moving forward in 2021. We're also going to be using funds that we have, some of our existing resources that we got back after the essentially the return of a bond from the lawsuit regarding the Blue Diamond Annex building. We're going to be using that to fund a historic district survey for the Richmond Grove neighborhood. Now, that's the area south of R Street, between roughly 12th Street on the west and 19th Street on the east, between Southside Park and Poverty Ridge. It's one of the only quarters of the central city that doesn't have its own historic district, but there are many resources, there are many historic buildings there, a lot of interesting stories to tell, including several landmarks associated with African American history. We've talked about Nathaniel Cawley's office, that's located in Richmond Grove, as well as Japanese American and Chinese American history, because those were the populations that largely moved in mid-century with the demolition of the West End. So we're going to be surveying it, looking at it from a perspective not only of 19th and early 20th century architecture, and there's some wonderful architecture all the way through mid-century, but also the legacy of the neighborhood and the culture and community that are there and have been there, and how those are expressed in the built environment. That's going to be really our main project for 2021. In addition to, and we'll let you know more at our next roundtable and in upcoming emails, we are going to be holding an online home tour this year. We're not exactly sure how it's going to work, but it is going to happen. So we had a question online about, is RG&A paying into the project as well? One difference with this is, because this is something that's been an ongoing project of ours, and RG&A is a much smaller organization. A lot of Central City neighborhood associations are very small and have very limited resources. We're paying essentially for the whole project in the same way that we did for the survey of Newton Booth Historic District a decade ago. And just because of the realities of the fact we're a small organization, our main fundraiser is the home tour, which of course we didn't have last year. We can only pay for a survey like this about once a decade, but we've been talking about doing this for years, and we figured it was time to put our resources into action in the best way that we could in the part of the city where there was already some survey work done, but was facing a lot of development pressure right now. It doesn't mean we're going to stop, but it means we're going to have to do a lot more tours, a lot more fundraising, hopefully a lot more promotion of what being a historic district means, more education, more just sharing those stories. And I'd like now to introduce Don Cox, who's a member of our board and one of the two principals of Historic Environment Consultants, along with Paula Bogosian. Don, I'll have you go ahead and turn on your camera now and share your screen so we can see the presentation about Montgomery Way. Okay. Let's see if Don's there. Okay, you're still muted, Don, but we can.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, Paula's here with me.
There, okay.
Okay. Some time ago, Paula and I were approached by Sharon Kaplan and Evelyn Fallon on Montgomery Way to produce landmark nominations for their homes. Evelyn Fallon's is right there behind me. And those landmark nominations were successful, and a graduate student from Sac State took them over and turned them into National Register nominations, which were also successful. After that, Sharon approached us to put together a historic district. She then went out and did two things. One is that, as Bill mentioned, she raised money to help pay our fee. And she also circulated a petition ahead of this project and got 15 neighbors to sign that they were either enthusiastically endorsing this nomination or they would not oppose it. And so out of the 23 houses on the street, they have 15 that are committed to the district already. There are 23 houses on Montgomery Way, as I mentioned, and 21 of them are contributing structures to the historic district. At least 11 of these houses were designed by Dean and Dean. The Carley Company, when they started this development, they wanted to ensure the quality of the neighborhood. And so they wanted to impress people to get them to buy and move into this large neighborhood. And they used Montgomery Way kind of as their gateway. They would send people down Franklin Boulevard, and then they had the Carley home and the Cutter home right there on the corner, amidst all the trees where the old Curtis Ranch house used to be. And then there was across the street was a billboard, and that billboard also directed them down Montgomery Way. And then on Montgomery Way, there were several houses that the Carley Company built as model homes. And there were at least two of them which were completely furnished by the John Bruner Company. I'm going to, let's see if our video works. Can you see that?
No, we can't see it. Can you share the screen?
How do I do that?
Okay. All right, you should be able to screen share now, so hit the green share screen button at the bottom of your screen.
No, I'm probably gonna have to stop the video. Oh, crap.
All right, so in Zoom, there's a green button that says share screen at the bottom. If you click on that,
Okay,
you should be able to see.
got it.
All right.
All right. Now let's give it another try. Okay. Now Montgomery, the Montgomery Way Historic District is located, as indicated here, just west of Highway 99. North of Sutterville Road, east of Curtis Park and East Curtis Park Drive, and west of Franklin Boulevard. And there it is, Montgomery Way up towards the north end of Curtis Park. Okay. Now we're going to I'm going to take you on a little walk, and we're going to go down the street. And I think as we progress down the street, I'll be stopping the video from time to time to make a few comments, but I'll try and interrupt as little as possible, because what I want you to do is get a feeling for this place. And when you walk from one end to the other, you will know why this was being promoted as a historic district. As I said before, this is Evelyn Fallon's house. This is on the National Register of Historic Places.
Is this the one that won the prize?
Yeah, I'm mentioning that later. This is Sharon Kaplan's house. This is also on the National Register of Historic Places. This house right here has been nominated as a landmark. This home was the home of John Montgomery Roberts, which is where the street name came from. He was the general sales manager for the Carley Company. I'm going to stop you just for a minute just to include some comments here. The predominant architectural styles reflect the 1920 to 1940 era of American architectural design, which employed a wide range of eclectic revivalist styles, which were popular in the country at that time. These styles reflect various versions of architectural styles from different European countries, probably experienced by military personnel during World War I. American tourism to Europe at the end of the war contributed to this trend. These revivalist styles and mixture of their features became very popular throughout the country during this era, and examples are legion in Sacramento. Versions of their interpretations are reflected in the residents within this district. The styles and the eclectic interpretations and combinations most common to the district include the following: Italian Renaissance, Classical Revival, Spanish Colonial, Mediterranean, Tudor, Monterey style, and American Colonial. This, oops, let me back up a sec. This house was Curtis Cutter's house. And he and Carly, it's interesting because Curtis Cutter married Carly's only daughter. And so that made him part of the family. And they built the first two residences here on Montgomery Way. And as I will show you later, Cutter was not only a member of the Carly Company, but he was also the manager of the Cutter lumber mill. And guess whose lumber built these houses? And this is the Carly residence. This is also on the National Register of Historic Places. Janice Calpo did the nomination on this. I just want to call your attention to this picture. This was taken during a ball at the Sutter Club in the 1930s. And most of the people in this photograph lived on Montgomery Way. Okay, yeah, I want to stop here. One tool that was rather helpful to me in putting together our nomination and in putting together this presentation was Dan Murphy's book on Sacramento's Curtis Park. These Arcadia books come, some of them are really good and some of them are not so. But I would recommend Dan's book, it's excellent. One of the things that I really liked about his book is he managed to secure a lot of portraits of the people who were principals in this. And this is James Carley. And Curtis Cutter. And the Cutter Mill and Lumber Company, who provided a good deal of the lumber for the development. Here's one of their first maps. They also provided land not only for the Curtis Park, but also for the for this school, which was, of course, also designed by Dean and Dean. Now, this kind of cuts to the heart of it. We call this Montgomery Way the Gateway District. And as I mentioned earlier, all the advertisements for this development guided people down Franklin Boulevard right to this corner where Cutter and Curtis had their homes, and across the street from them was a billboard. And so you were directed down Montgomery Way. And then they had built several model homes along that street, Dean and Dean designed homes. And that's why we call this the Gateway District. This was Home Designer magazine in 1923. And as you notice, as they have titled it, Views About the Entrance to South Curtis Oaks. And here's a better view of it. And you can see that there are quite a number of houses there on the right-hand side. And you can see the billboard peeking at you on the far left. And they were featured, these homes, in advertising, particularly the Evelyn Fallon's house, which is known also as the Anne Hathaway Cottage. And both Sharon's house and Evelyn's were furnished by the John Bruner Company to enhance them as model homes. This was during the Better Homes Week, which was a major national promotion. And a couple of the houses in the district were reviewed by a national panel. And the Anne Hathaway Cottage took 6th prize nationally in the Better Homes contest. And once again, this is the Anne Hathaway Cottage, and the furnishings in there are by the Bruner Company. Oh, and then there's this. In this ad, down where the red underlining is, it says South Curtis Oaks has 20-year restrictions, no objectionable elements allowed. And this was common to the time. And when you signed the deed, when you bought one of these homes, for the next 20 years, you promised you would not sell it to a person of color. And it was not until the 1950s, 1960s that Sacramento was blessed to have Nathaniel Cawley, because he helped bust up a lot of that. Now we put together the materials on this district, and I pulled out a separate document, 10 pages, and we talk about the human landscape, because if you learn more about the history of this district, you find that the people are equally as interesting as their homes and their architectural styles. This was an interesting little piece that I found in the newspaper. I read through it and I passed it by. And then as I looked at other articles, all of a sudden what became apparent to me is that when you look at the guest list for people who went to the engagement party for Mary Lou Heilbrunn and John Montgomery Roberts, and you look at the guests, and there are many of them who would all sooner or later be living on Montgomery Way. And this article, this event, was in October of 1922, long before all of the houses were completed. And so what you find is that all of these people knew each other before they became residents of Montgomery Way. And this was kind of, I think, a stroke of genius on the part of the Carley Company, in that they leveraged their friends. There were other commonalities that early residents would share. 8 were World War I veterans. 9 were members of the prestigious Sutter Club. 9 were members of the Del Paso Country Club. 10 were affiliated with one or more of the Masonic orders, and 7 were affiliated with the nearby Sacramento Children's Home. In 1934, 6 couples from Montgomery Way were cheering for UC Berkeley at the big game with Stanford. Cutter, Wiggin, Watson, Seymour, Moreland, and Brown. And then you've also seen that at the Sutter Club ball, 5 couples from Montgomery Way were photographed. Cutter, Watson, Seymour, Brown, and Grau. But leveraging the friends was something that they did in their advertising. You know, this came out of a large full-page ad for the development, but you see here they dropping names of people who have bought homes in the district, and it's even giving you the amount that they're paying for their house. Oh, and this is, oops. This is Edwin and Audrey of Bedell. The Bedells purchased the Carley house and lived there from 1935 to 1959. It was designed by Dean and Dean. Edwin Bedell's stepfather owned the Clooney Hotel at 9th and K. Eddie got his start in the restaurant business by opening a coffee shop in the Clooney Hotel. He would eventually become the owner of the Clooney. In 1939, he opened his signature restaurant at 1117 11th Street. Bedell's was fine dining at its best. Let's go back. I'm going to read a quote here from Mary Ellen Burns' book on Sacramento restaurants. Bedell's was packed 3 deep at lunch and dinner by Capitol staffers, lobbyists, politicians, and tourists. A combination cocktail lounge and fine dining restaurant offering superior food and ambiance, top-notch service, and capable, discreet bartenders, making it a powerful draw for political notables and Hollywood celebrities. Audrey Mckim Bedell was no stranger to Sacramento old money. She was a member of a pioneer California family. Her father, Samuel Warder Mckim, was president of the Weinstock and Lubin stores for some 30 years. She grew up in a large neoclassical house at 2015 H Street. She and Eddie donated $120,000 in 1965 to the Building Fund for Methodist Hospital. In her 1996 obituary, she is credited with being a co-founder of that hospital. The Bedells retired from the restaurant business in 1959 and moved to Pebble Beach. John Quincy and Harriet Brown. This is 2750 Montgomery. The Browns had their house designed for them in 1937 by architect Fred Harrison, and it was constructed by popular builder Frank Williams. John was a prominent attorney in Sacramento and also served as district attorney and as a Superior Court judge. Both his father and grandfather served as mayors of Sacramento. Historian Reed referred to Brown as, quote, among the leading members of the legal profession in Sacramento, end quote. Brown was a graduate of UC Berkeley. Harriet Brown was active in community affairs with memberships in the Opera Guild, Tuesday Club, Junior League, the American Women of Radio and Television. She was also active with the Sacramento Children's Home. Harriet was a member of All Saints Memorial Episcopal Church. She was a graduate from the National Cathedral School in Washington, D.C., a college operated by the Episcopal Church. Her father had been the organizer of the Episcopal Diocese in the Sacramento region, and her brother lived down the street at 2672 Montgomery. That's Sharon's house. The Browns were part of that group of residents who all knew each other before the neighborhood existed. They often socialized together at the Cider Club or the Del Paso Country Club. Harriet Brown died from injuries she suffered in an auto accident in 1958. Judge Brown had been an ensign in the Navy Flying Corps in 1918 and was a member of the American Legion. He was also a member of the Native Sons of the Golden West. John Quincy Brown died in 1971. I'm just giving you a few overviews from this 10-page document that I prepared, and the 10 pages that I prepared is just half of it. This one right here, Donald and Thelma Walkhorst. Their house was built in early 1923 by the Carly Company as one of its demonstration homes on Montgomery Way. It was designed by Dean and Dean. Thelma and Donald Walkhorst were the first occupants in 1924. They lived there through 1968, a period of 44 years. Donald died in 1968 and Thelma in 1988. The Walkhorst family, in the lower right-hand corner there, you see that's from Thompson and West. They were jewelers. And there was a Walkhorst jewelry store in Sacramento from the 1850s right up until about, I think, 1960. Donald Walkhorst was an attorney. He was well known also as a member of the board of SMUD. He had a 43-year tenure on the director of SMUD. He was one of the people that took SMUD from just being an idea to a true entity. He was involved in the campaign, a bond campaign to raise money so that they could purchase the electrical grid from PG&E and thus establish SMUD.
Don, just so you know, we've got about another 5 minutes.
Okay, I think we're getting close here. Okay, that's the end of that segment. And so there it is. I think it speaks for itself when you look at the people and what they did and what they accomplished. When you look at the houses,
the architects contributed to that,
and the architects who designed it. This is a wonderful historic district. Thank you.
Thanks. Can you just hit the button to exit screen sharing?
I hope I get the right one here.
It should be on the top of the screen.
Thank you. There we go.
And we had some questions. Actually, there was one question that looks like it was unanswered. At least I didn't hear a response, and also some snark. But we'll focus on the question for now. Is from just a moment. Okay, the question was regarding the other side of Montgomery Way, or whether it was equally eligible. I guess there's another portion of Montgomery Way on the other side of the park.
both sides of the street.
No, he's talking about on the west side of the park. And actually, in a sense, no. I mean, it could be a historic district on its own and possibly even stand on its own. I think you could say that for all of South Curtis Oaks. But we started with this one because it was the gateway district. And that was really the key. This is where they guided people into the development. This is where they built the model homes, and this is where the sales were made.
Okay. And just speaking on behalf of Preservation Sacramento and what I know about local preservation funding is very often the way that we get historic districts is through attention, through the demands of the community to protect their neighborhood. And so the fact is right now we've got about 30 historic districts. Most of them are in the central city because that's where the need was and where the community coalesced and got together and told the city we want historic districts. It wasn't the city saying, okay, we're going to create a preservation program. It came from the community, and that's how Preservation Sacramento operates. We don't want to show up in anyone's neighborhood and say we are going to make you a historic district whether you like it or not. It's not very nice, and we certainly don't have the resources to do that over people's opposition or the desire. It comes from people in the community who come to us asking for guidance or expertise, or in some cases, fiscal support. We've been working with the neighborhood association in Richmond Grove, for example, for several years, talking with them about this. And the historic district survey we're doing is a result of things like demolition of buildings that were able to be demolished because they might have been eligible as contributors to a district, but not as landmarks, and so they were able to get demolition permits. And then Montgomery Way is moving forward because of people in the community raising their voice and talking with their neighbors and then forming a plan. The city of Sacramento is about 3/4 unsurveyed. We don't know where all the historic resources are. Cities like Los Angeles did a program called Survey LA, where they got private funding, folks like the Getty with deep pockets, to pay the substantial sums to survey the entire city. Sacramento doesn't have that, so we depend on our community to let us know, unless we help let the city know where the historic places are. And the impression one gets from a neighborhood like Montgomery Way is that these are all the homes of the wealthy, but a lot of the historic districts and historic places are not necessarily the homes of the wealthy, and certainly not all the homes of white folks. As Carson mentioned, the focus on African American communities, on the resources associated with Asian Americans, with Latinos, it's all part of the historic preservation field, and we are not going to be able to continue the preservation field without expanding the constituency and expanding the voice of what is a historic place beyond what people associate it with. And Montgomery Way, yes, quite frankly, it's a historic district of wealthy white people, but it's an important place. It's significant, and it has been surveyed. So the idea is moving forward from here. And Don and Paula's scholarship on this is very strong. The board is reviewing it, and we are pretty darn happy with the work. So thank you, Don. There's a couple questions. I think Elizabeth Ochoa has her hand up, but I think you may have to do a chat. But I'll go ahead and turn on the audio for Catherine Tobias. Catherine, you have your hand up. Did you have a question? Catherine, okay. All right, she's muted, so I don't think she had the question. Elizabeth, let me try again to see if I can. No, I can't. Okay, Elizabeth, I'm sorry if you put in a question to the chat, but I haven't been able to see it. So if you could type the question into the Q&A or the chat window, we'll try to answer it.
Chair does not swivel
Nope.
well. Feet don't move well.
All right.
It's a thick carpet.
Okay, community-driven work. Okay, here's the comment. Similar to the acknowledgement at the beginning of this meeting, it would be nice if the process included more information about the Nisenan, their lives here, and how they used the land. Many of the oaks that the neighborhood was named after were no doubt tended carefully before the land was settled. Now, that very often, if there's a larger historic survey document, like an environmental impact report, they will start with prehistory. They'll start with the history of the indigenous communities on the land. It's not necessarily what is done when we're surveying a historic district, because what we're looking for is what is there now, what is standing that exists. A larger question, maybe one, this is a broader question, is reintroducing that legacy as part of a citywide effort to document the history of Sacramento. What is what does remain? Is there anything that remains, and or what else needs to be documented, needs to be shared? And very often the stewardship of that information is within the hand of the Nisenan community. And so maybe that's an upcoming goal, is to get more of that information so it is present and can be inserted, because we know it, into things like historic district nominations. Don, do you have any comments on that or any closing remarks?
No.
Okay. Well, I think that it looks like we have one more. Actually, Dan Murphy is online. I'm gonna turn on his audio, as he's the author of the Curtis Park book whose cover you mentioned. So Dan, go ahead.
So I don't know if you can hear me yet.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to comment briefly that there was a family story in the Curtis family, that the reason that their farmstead was sited there, it was an old oak that was on the street. It was the oldest oak in Northern California by some reports at the time. And the family story was that the reason that Mr. Curtis's predecessor had selected that site is that it had been used as a camping site by the Nisenan because of the oaks and the numbers of acorns produced. There was a swale there. It was an area that had more water than other areas nearby. And it was reputedly, according to the family, traditions, selected initially for the farmstead because the Nisenan had used it. So there's a continuity of habitation there that's an interesting aspect. And the other thing I wanted to mention was that Curtis Cutter was the grandchild of the Curtis family. And so there's a continuity there that's historically interesting. And then he married the daughter of the Carleys, and both of those are kinds of interesting anecdotal connections to the earlier history of Sacramento. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. And it sounds like we're basically at the end of our presentation. We're running out of time. One comment we got was actually another one from Elizabeth Ochoa, with interest in a presentation about the Eichler district. And it sounds like that might actually be a great subject for the next roundtable, which will be coming up in May. And Don and I are part of the subcommittee that puts the roundtable on. So it sounds like that'll be closer to fruition and part of the city process this summer. So I think it would be definitely great to have a video presentation or slideshow with some of the historic photos showing some of the current condition and one of the stories about the Eichlers. And one thing that's kind of unique about Eichlers is that Eichler, as a developer, refused to have racial covenants on his properties. So it's a bit of a tidbit, but okay, maybe that'll be a sneak peek or something we want to talk about next time to a greater extent. So I'd like to say thank you to Councilmember Valenzuela, to Director Anderson, to Laurie Stetson, and to Don Cox for the presentation. Thank you for all of your attendance and your time. This video will be posted onto YouTube probably by sometime tomorrow. And I urge and encourage all of you, if you're not a member of Preservation Sacramento, to join. If you are a member, thanks for being a member, and hopefully you'll be renewing. We're going to do what we can to bring back member content and other benefits of membership, but principally we need your support because it's the only way we can carry on this mission. Like I said, we're going to do a virtual tour this year, but your membership is really what keeps us going and allows us to carry out special projects like this. So thanks everyone for being part of the 2021 February Preservation Roundtable, and good afternoon.